Hey, this is Tim, and I'm doing my persuasive speech. Uh, I know I'm supposed to have a live audience, but my family's been out of town for the last week, so sorry about that. But here goes. Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Wynn, and today I'll be talking about how violent video games doesn't cause violence. So, 56% of Americans say they play games on a regular basis. That's a whole whopping 150 million people, and that's just in the US alone. So, my whole life, I've been playing games, and adults have always gone up to me saying, "Oh, if you play these types of games, you'll end up as a thug or you'll end up as a violent person in general." But after the years have gone by, studies and studies again have come and they've just debunked that myth. So I'll be talking about these studies. I'll be talking about how there could be other factors, and I'll be talking about benefits. So the Guardian, they published an article, and they talk about how a university in New Zealand did a meta-analysis of 28 studies, and after the meta-analysis, they concluded that there was no correlation between video games and violence, or violent video games and violence. Uh, and it's just not these 28 studies. There's been multiple studies, and that the 28 is just a handful out of all these studies that have debunked the myth. So the New York Times adds on to this. They talk about how there was a study where they had a group that played violent video games and a group that played non-violent. And after these people would play the games, they would take these tests. And in the studies, it shows that these people they showed more, the people who played video games that were violent, they were more aggressive in the test, but it was just a short-term thing. In the end of the study, they concluded that it was just a short-term effect and it wasn't uh, permanent. So if you see these studies and you read them and you realize maybe violent video games aren't the factor, what's causing all this violence in the U.S.? So Vox expands on this. They talk about how if you look at the top 10 countries that spend money on games, the U.S. is fourth. But if you see the same chart of the 10 countries and you use violent crimes, the U.S. is actually number one. So you think, hey, how come the U.S. is fourth, but they're number one in violent crimes? So in the article by Vox, they talk about how there could be other reasons why the U.S. is number one and not four. They talk about how in the U.S. How gun laws are different, how bullying is different, how mental awareness is different, and there's a plethora of other reasons on why people are more violent. And when you see all these factors, video games becomes a really minute factor, if even it is one. So WAMU, they published an article, and a psychology professor at Oxford, he researches a lot of these studies on violent video games and just violence in people in general. And after all of his studies, he's concluded that there's no correlation between violence and violent video games. He's talked about how there's no correlation between how much time they spend on the games, how violent they are, what type of genre it is, and he even thinks that it's just a stigma from the older generation on why games are just bad in general. So after I've talked about that, I can talk about how video games can actually be beneficial. So Geico, they published an article on their website, and it just has a list of benefits that people can get from playing video games. Some of them being manual dexterity, gray matter in the brain, and problem solving. And these are just three out of the plethora. I'm talking about crazy numbers of benefits that people get from playing video games. And on Psychology Today, they published an article, and they were just talking about how there's the same benefits. They had a study where they had tests on people who played games regularly and people who didn't. And after the study, in all the tests that had to do with all these benefits, people who played video games scored higher than people who didn't. So hopefully, after seeing all these factors and all these studies and how it can be beneficial, you can see why video games should be out of the discussion on why people are violent. Thank you.